Good morning and welcome to Rising. We have a stunning show for you all this Thursday, but before we get to that, we want to mention that we are actually expanding the ways that you can watch the show.
That's right, Robbie. We are now available on demand. Currently, we are on the Plex TV app and will be expanding to more, such as Roku and Apple TV, in the fall.
Yay us.
Yeah, it makes it feel, real for your aunts and uncles. It might not be quite so
like,
online.
what is the YouTube?
Right, and I just bought my first real grown-up TV in my life. I am one of those millennials who watches everything on their laptop.
I have 2 TVs in my home, and I still have cable, like an old person.
You're really ahead of the ball. You're a mature.
But now I'm cutting cable for sure because our show is available.
Yeah, I was gonna say I finally have like that interface, that modern TV interface with the remote control, and where you can toggle between these kind of online stations and your streaming stations and cable. And I'm really looking forward to being able to tell people who have this now how to access this program. I think they'll enjoy it.
It's very exciting. All right, well, let's get into the news of the day. What do we have, Briahna?
Well, Aaron Mate joins us to discuss John Bolton's latest gaffe and Biden's trip to Israel. Plus, Emily Jashinsky is back to discuss the 10-year-old that was allegedly raped and the man in custody accused of impregnating the girl.
But first, yesterday, inflation hit 9.1% in June. That's according to the Consumer Price Index, which is a broad measure of everyday goods and services related to the cost of living. However, the calculations excluded food and energy prices, which has seen even steeper increases in some cases. Now, according to new Pew Research polls, 56% of Americans blame Biden's policies for the economy. 27% of Democrats agreed Biden's policies made the economic matters worse, while 20% said that they had made them better.
In an attempt to reassure Americans, the president called June's inflation report out of date and said U.S. inflation is the lowest of almost every major nation. He also tweeted that the report does not reflect the 40-cent relief at the pump that's dipped modestly since mid-June. But some Dems, including Tammy Baldwin, are saying that the dip in gas prices isn't enough.
Now, the claim that inflation is lower here than every other major nation is just not true, right? I see Newsweek rated it mostly false. Like, it is true we're doing better than, your frequent inflation high countries. I think, Greece, Venezuela, et cetera. Maybe I'm maligning Greece. I think I saw them on the. But so our rate is higher than the Eurozone average of 8.1%. South Korea, that was last month. Canada. So it's not, it's not. But we're not doing like absolutely better than a lot of our peer nations.
Yeah,
we're doing
right.
About the same or maybe a little worse in some cases.
Yeah, I saw a tweet yesterday. I was struggling to find it because Twitter was down this morning, which threw my whole life
for a whole hour. Briahna just cried in this chair for over an hour straight.
Rocked myself slowly. But yeah, no, I did see a tweet that had a list of major countries and what their inflation rates were, and we weren't doing better than others. I remember seeing that Canada was doing a little better than us. I think they were in the high 7s. But it is also true that across the board there are global inflation issues. Yep. So I think it is true to say you can't lay it fully at the feet of Joe Biden.
No,
this is largely a supply
not.
chain crisis, all these other kinds of things. But the question is the captain of the ship going to take responsibility for what he can do in his power to help make it feel less horrible for people in the United States of America? And what some commentators have pointed out is that even though folks in other countries might say have high inflation rates, be experiencing higher costs in stores and stuff, they have countries with better infrastructure. They have countries where they've said you can take public transportation for free. They have countries where you don't have to worry about the cost of education because they have free education, including higher education. They have free health care. And so they are not feeling it.
We have free education, not free higher education.
Right. Well, they have free higher education. And so they're not feeling it in those ways. And so perhaps that affects how people are feeling it in a way that, Joe Biden could take some responsibility for. But I hear also that we have a clip of what Tammy Baldwin said earlier. Let's take a listen.
When people come up to you in Wisconsin in the grocery store or at the gas station and ask you about high prices, is that what you would tell them, that the data is out of date?
Certainly not. I know that people are really suffering with the inflation. And while it is great news that in the last month gas prices have gone down by about 40 cents per gallon, that's really not the break people are looking for.
Well, it seems like she understands on some level how craven it is to kind of respond to public frustrations with, we're doing incrementally better. It's not clear, however, what the next steps are going to be.
Yeah, and gas prices are in fact going down. I hope they continue to go down, but that is a volatile market. We have no real idea. It is very affected by what's going on in Russia, Ukraine. Again, that being a policy choice, I think I say this every day, but like that is not just an unchosen, whoops, I'm Joe Biden, I can't do anything about this, which sure, fine. Joe Biden didn't cause the pandemic, the supply chain disruptions, fine. I am not pinning it all on him. I think that's unfair, but we are making policy choices that are contributing, and again, he didn't cause Russia to invade Ukraine, but we are continuing to fund the Ukrainian opposition, and whatever it takes is the official line, despite no public appetite for that, and it's continuing to cause harm here. So that is a policy choice, and that's a Joe Biden policy choice. I don't know if there was a Republican in charge if they would do that, maybe even a different Democrat. I mean, all the Democrats seem very committed, seem more committed to Ukraine sovereignty than taking care of Americans in some way.
There was a conversation about the U.S. getting involved in 2014 around the Maidan coup, and Barack Obama made a different choice. And Joe was there as his VP, and it's apparently feeling very differently than he did back in the day.
Well, Jake Tapper also pressed Biden's economic counsel on the high cost of goods aside from gas. Let's watch that.
That does not address the fact that groceries and rent are skyrocketing.
Absolutely. Let's talk about rent, which was definitely reflected in today's CPI number. In the short term, the president is giving the Federal Reserve the space it needs to do what it needs to do to control inflation. The Federal Reserve has the dual mandate of controlling prices while maintaining maximum employment. It is doing what it needs to do. Other presidents have tried to intervene in the Fed's actions. This president has said they're independent. He respects what they need to do. And part of what the Federal Reserve's actions will do, and we're already seeing it, is to cool off the housing market, which will find its way into helping with rent. But let's face it, we have a housing shortage in this country. It goes back a decade, and that's why over the medium term and longer term, this president has a plan to increase housing supply in this country, because we know how very important it is to ensure that everybody has a place to live.
Wall Street is expecting the Fed to act and increase interest rate hikes another 1% by the end of this month to combat inflation, according to CNBC. This comes as Dems are urging Biden to support a new injection of resources for countries at the International Monetary Fund, which would issue at least $650 billion in aid for Ukraine. So I was reading more about this story in anticipation of us talking about this today, and it's complicated and sort of outside my expertise. Maybe you know more about it. As far as I get, this is a pile of money that is almost, it's not like an additional aid package that we're writing a check for, but is part of these funds that the IMF already has, or part of the U.S. allocation. Now, I think we've already put this money into it, and then it gets allocated for different things. So it's a little bit more complicated than just like, oh, we're writing another check for Ukraine. A little bit. I think at the end of the day, that is still bottom line what it is.
And he has to contend with the optics battle.
It's not a good optics battle. Yeah.
And again, it feels a little bit gross to constantly be comparing, money given here versus money that's spent at home. I have said many times that I feel like there has not been a solid articulation of the litmus test for U.S. involvement, and that there's an open paycheck to write off the cost of imperialism, and that's a concern. But generally speaking, I think there are humanitarian endeavors that are worth spending on, and it can't always be, we never help anyone as long as anybody's helping at home. But you have to have a justification for it. And I'm sorry, a year after we had all of this hullabaloo over Build Back Better, and how we were going to have all this spending for the American people, and to have Biden's entire agenda derailed, in large part because we had these corporate Dems in Manchin and Sinema saying that they weren't willing to spend. It was too much spending. And then to turn around and so easily be able to open the pocketbook for these other kinds of endeavors overseas, you have to square that. You have to figure out how to square that to the American people.
Especially if you think there should be, and I think most people do think, there should be some democratic accountability. I guess maybe it's different if there's massive public will to spend American money on humanitarian causes in Ukraine, the Middle East, Africa, wherever else, but there clearly isn't. There absolutely is not.
Yeah,
they want that money spent not at all or spent here.
Yeah.
So but it's not put to the American people's approval. It's just done by politicians in both parties who are of a more nation-building approach. Sometimes they're laundering their nation-building under the guise of humanitarian efforts, and that's what they're doing, and it's clearly not what the people want. The people send a message every presidential election that they want to break with that. They almost never get it with the major Afghanistan aside, finally.
Yeah.
But then Biden went right back in for the exact kind of foreign policy that the American people have rejected over and over again. American people in both political parties.
Yeah, I agree. You raised an interesting question earlier. What would have happened if, Putin had invaded Ukraine under a Republican president? I don't know. There is a way that historically conservatives have tended to be the leaders of this kind of, these kind of military interventions.
I don't know about historically, certainly in the late 90s to Trump.
Yeah, and
yes.
I don't know what would have happened now that
lifetimes.
if it had happened in the context of this interesting realignment where Donald Trump really went against the Republican Party at the time in 2016 and was making this clarion call against interventionism that at the time a lot of the rest of the conservative pack, the 16 other people he was running against, were not aligned with. But he changed the identity of the Republican Party in these important ways. And it's not clear to me if it weren't Trump, but it were another Republican in Congress, what would have happened, in the White House rather, what would have happened?
Yeah, it's interesting to speculate about. But it's Trump, so it could have been, if this had happened under Trump, it also could have gone the other way just because Trump's kind of random. And who knows? I'm not sure how he would have responded. It's hard to predict exactly.
It's true.
He had impulses on foreign policy that were an improvement, I think. But they really were just impulses. He had a lot of impulses.
It's true. He didn't withdraw from Afghanistan.
Right. But the more interesting implication is that he has, however, set the stage and I think finally shown other Republicans that what the appetite for is a more restrained foreign policy. So I could see, if it's not Trump, you could see someone theoretically who is more savvy about what the base wants consistently on this front, or you could just see a broad return to form.
Yeah, it could be just a rebrand.
They're very committed.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
we'll have to see. But we'll tell you what's on Briahna's radar coming up next.